Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to EB Yoga. Today I want to talk about why I broke up with Updog. So Updog is a back bend and it's usually performed most often in a sequence called taking a Vinyasa. So here is me taking a Vinyasa, moving from plank to chaturanga, flip the toes to Updog, and flip the toes back to down dog. So let's look at a picture of me in Upward Dog and take a look at what a few of my joints are doing here. Notice that only the palms of my hands and the tops of my feet are touching the ground. My legs are actually floating above the ground. Notice the arch in my back and how big that arch is and where it looks like I'm back bending from. Lower back, middle back, upper back. It looks like my lower back is arching quite a bit here, but our lower backs actually do not bend like that. The main reason I broke up with Updog has to do with my chronic lower back pain, but Updog also has a few of our other joints in some not so healthy positions, and I'll talk about those a little bit later. But first, a quick story about my chronic lower back pain. Back in 2014, I had some major life changes going on. I began working in office jobs, sitting at a desk 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And I got a new car, which was an SUV, which felt like my foot couldn't quite reach the steering pedal. And I also began my 200-hour yoga teacher training. So of all of these things, I began to develop this chronic lower back pain, specifically on my right side and my lower back and my hip. This lower back pain got progressively worse from 2014 to 2017. And I just felt like I had to deal with it. Like, you're over 30 now, your body's gonna hurt more and more each year, but I do not agree to that anymore. I was lucky to find Alexandria Crowe, or Alex as she likes to go by, and in November of 2017, I took my first workshop with her, and it was just like light bulb after light bulb, like, wow, this is why I have chronic lower back pain. So I stopped blaming my new job and sitting at the desk. I stopped blaming my car that I couldn't quite reach the gas pedal. And I took an honest look at what my yoga practice had become from the time of 2014 when I started my teacher training to 2017, which now by that time I had opened up my own yoga studio. So unfortunately, I had to start blaming my yoga practice as the source of my lower back and hip pain. And that might sound kind of shocking if you've not really looked at some of these poses this way before, and especially coming out of the mouth of a yoga teacher, because a lot of people come to yoga to heal their lower back pain, but there's a few different pieces to this puzzle, so let me explain. First of all, I have a hypermobile skeleton. So being hypermobile means that my joints can move past what is the safe, normal, average, functional range of motion. So the average person can move their body in a way to get through life and do everyday normal activities. If you have a hypermobile skeleton, your joints will go past this range of motion, and that doesn't mean it's better. It actually puts you more at risk in a lot of certain ways. So let me give you an example with my shoulder. So I've always considered myself a naturally flexible person, and that's part of why I fell in love with yoga. Like, whoa, something I'm good at. But now I have discovered it is the hypermobility of my joints, not my muscles, that's letting me get into these poses. So the average person's shoulder, now without arching your spine, sitting up straight, how far can you reach your arm up without changing anything else? So most people can get their arm somewhere here by their face. They might be able to get it totally straight up and down. So measuring in degrees, if this is 0 degrees, that would be 90. And that would be about 180. So now without arching my back, I can take my shoulder that much further. That's like an extra, I think it was 30 degrees I have in my shoulder. You might think of certain back bends where the arms go behind the head and things like that, other poses where you're reaching back. So I have hypermobility, not just in my shoulder, but basically every single joint of my body, even my toes. So there's this whole range of hypermobility. You might be hypermobile in one joint, none. You might be hypermobile in all of them, like me. There's a whole spectrum, and that's what kind of can get confusing because of the naturally flexible thing that people think they have, and then they come to yoga, flexibility increases, but it's not really the flexibility increasing, you're just starting to access that hypermobility in your joints that you may or may not have known you have. So you might be wondering, why is this not a good thing? I'm hypermobile, I can do more yoga poses. The problem comes with the communication that's going on between our joints and our brain. So for example, my shoulder, when I take it back as far as I can, I do not get a pain signal. My brain doesn't go, ow, that hurts, stop moving your joint that far. It's literally like, I just can't go any further, but it's not painful. I'm not getting a pain signal from my joint to my brain that I probably should be getting. So there's this proprioception that can be a problem in hypermobile people. And again, that can go on that whole spectrum where you might have a lot of hypermobility or very little. Whenever I have had an injury because of my yoga practice, it's been in one of my joints, usually my shoulder or my hip. I actually have a hip injury going on right now because about 5 days ago, I put myself into a lunge that was a little too low. And you know, I say all the time in my videos, if you've seen any of the other ones, to not sink your hips so far in a lunge, find a stretch in the muscle in the thigh. As a hypermobile person, sometimes it can be really hard to listen to your body because by the time you get that stretch or sensation that you're looking for, like I'm mentioning in the shoulder, by the time you actually get to that point, the joint is way far past the average range of motion. So back to why this is a problem. Because of that lack of communication, your joint's going further than it should, and it's pulling on tendons, ligaments, whatever kind of connective tissue, depending on what kind of joint it is. And it's not good. It's not good to pull on tendons and ligaments to the point that they're stretched to the very end limit that they can get to. And I believe this is what is causing a lot of the yoga injuries. This is just based on my own research and what I've been doing, my studying with Alex Crowe and everything. So disclaimer, I'm not a doctor, a physical therapist. I am not in the medical field. I'm a yoga teacher studying hypermobility, functional range of motion, and looking at what's going on in my own body, in my own yoga practice, and trying to figure out a way to make this yoga thing work for everybody. Because of my hypermobility, I can achieve a lot of yoga poses. If I can't do them the first time, I can sort of practice for a couple weeks and achieve them later. But this achievement and this sort of pose chasing, and can I get this pose, and keep getting harder and harder poses, is just pulling and pulling more and more on these joints and these tendons and ligaments to get into these crazy poses with first one foot behind your head, now get both feet behind your head, now hug your arms around behind your back. It's like, where is this stopping point? If we're already having trouble communicating with the joint to the brain because of our hypermobility, we're not getting that stopping point and we just keep going further and further and further. I really don't see it ending in any way besides injury, because those tendons and ligaments, they don't just stretch forever. It's like a rubber band. You can stretch a rubber band and you can stretch it more and more and more. Eventually that rubber band's going to snap. It just doesn't stretch to infinity and beyond, you know? For example, my upward dog did not look like this when I first started yoga. The curve in my back did not appear so large, and especially in my lower back. It was through pushing my body into this pose repeatedly that I started to move some other joints to get myself into this big back bend past what is the functional range of motion. So the main joint that was affected here that helped me get into this bigger back bend was my SI joint. Your SI joint is where your spine lands into your pelvis and connects. It is a very small joint with very minimal movement. It's nothing like your elbow where you get a lot of range of motion. It moves just enough so that your spine is not glued to your pelvis, so that we can bend and walk and function in a normal, healthy way. The problem becomes when we start to pull on the tendons and ligaments around this SI joint to get more movement in our hips and lower back. And unfortunately, that is what I did to my SI joint to get into poses like Updog. For most people, we get the most range of motion in our spine from our T12 vertebrae, which is basically at the bottom of your rib cage, where the middle part of your back is going to meet the lower part of your spine. If you flex your spine, you probably feel where that moves. And if you twist, that's also where most of our twisting motion comes from. So if you, depending on how flexible you are in that area of your back, if you are hypermobile, you might be more flexible. But if you're hypermobile, you might start to move down into that SI area where the pelvis and the spine are meeting to get more flexibility there to get into a bigger back bend. So the average person's up dog looks like this. You can see that their legs are nowhere near the ground. It's kind of more like a plank with a little back bend, and you can see that that back bend is coming from that sort of middle back T12 area I was mentioning. So if the SI joint is joining in, that's probably the people where you see where the hips are super low to the ground. Like I said, the SI joint should have minimal movement. It is a joint that moves, but it's for stability, not for flexibility. It's just that movement, as I mentioned, for walking, twisting, stuff we do every day. When we're activating this joint and stretching it further and pushing it further to get into these yoga poses, I'm gonna say it's probably gonna end in pain. I 100% blame me doing what I did in yoga poses to my SI joint to what's caused my lower back and hip pain. Since I have taken some of these poses out of my practice, there are just flat out poses I don't do, including up dog, camel, wheel, scorpion, like all the things I was trying to achieve a couple years ago. I don't do them anymore, and my lower back feels so much better. It's never going to be healed completely because I've already done the damage to my SI joint that I've done. So it pops and clicks and makes funny noises that don't sound too healthy because it's not too healthy because I pushed myself too far. If you've ever felt any pain in the low back from any yoga pose, I encourage you to stop doing that pose. What's the point if it's causing pain? It's the benefit you might think you're getting from it is probably going to be negated by whatever pain you're causing yourself. So my motto is always, if it hurts, don't do it. And it's not just back bends for me that caused pain in my lower back and SI, things like warrior two and triangle, which I'll have another video going into those poses and why those negatively affect your SI joint. But it might not be just your lower back and SI that bothers you in up dog. Let's take a look at our hands and our feet too. If you take a look at my wrist in up dog, that's basically a 90-degree angle. And the average person with a functional range of motion cannot get their hand perfectly flat to 90 degrees like that, at least not without using gravity and body weight, and then pushing into that 90 degree might be causing some pain in the wrist. Now the same goes for the ankles. Most people can't get their ankles totally flat like that. So for them to have their feet flat on the floor, hands in that 90-degree angle, and then their entire body weight on those essentially four joints plus the low back, it's no wonder people don't like this pose. It's no wonder that people can't get into this pose. Getting into the full, quote, expression of the pose requires hypermobility in at least those 5 joints, and we didn't even look at the front of our hips yet either. So as I said, if you don't like up dog, you have permission not to do it. Through my studies with Alex Crowe, we take a look at each pose that we do in a yoga class and look at the functional range of motion that the average person's body can move in and compare that to what these yoga poses are asking us to do. And it's shocking and it's sad. It makes me sad that so many of these yoga poses are completely unattainable by the average person, and it makes me realize like how frustrating it can be if you have an average mobility, average range of motion, and you go to a yoga class and the teacher's like, oh, just keep trying, you'll get there. Like, no, flat out, some people will never get there because their skeleton won't let them. And telling people to keep trying and pushing and straining, they're not going to get there. So quit like feeding that. It's really making me look at the yoga world as a whole just in a very different way. And I never knew this before because I'm hypermobile. So of course I'm like cheerleading my students on, you're gonna get there, you're gonna get there. I got there, I can do it. But yeah, because I'm hypermobile, I already had that sort of advantage / disadvantage when it came to achieving those kind of poses. So what I am trying to do in my yoga classes is make every pose attainable for the average functional range of motion. I don't do poses like up dog or anything like that I've looked at and said, nope, The average person can't do that, so I'm not going to teach it. I really want my yoga classes to focus more on the stress relief benefits of yoga than the flexibility benefits. I am very excited to continue my studying with Alex. I will actually be with her next week, and I can't wait to keep spreading this message, because if it makes sense to me, I hope that it can make sense to you too. So Updog is something that's sort of a classical or easy, attainable pose. It's included in almost every yoga class I've ever gone to, and yet I just showed you why it's not easy and attainable, and definitely not for the average person's body. So that is my goal in my blog over these next few months, is to tackle some of these easy poses that show up in every class and take a look at what we're asking our joints to do in those poses and judge for ourselves. Is it easy? Is it attainable? Is it for the average person? Thank you so much for joining me for class today. I hope you enjoyed this discussion of why I broke up with Updog, and I hope to see you again soon. Namaste.